Hi, and welcome back. My name is Sheldon McLeod. This is Thinking Out Loud. It's presented to you here exclusively by the Saltwire Network. It's my opportunity to talk to some of the folks involved with some of the big news stories and some of the goings-on that are happening around us. And obviously, back to school is a huge issue. And if you had to drive into Halifax today, you'll see that traffic is back at its I wouldn't say pre-pandemic levels, but pretty darn close. This is my first opportunity to have a conversation with the fairly newly elected president of the Nova Scotia Teachers Union. Ryan Lutes is joining the conversation. Ryan, very much pleasure to meet you this way. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem, Sheldon. Thanks a lot for having me.
You took over in June. I know I had opportunities many times over the last number of years to speak to many presidents of NSTU. And of course, we're still in a pandemic situation. And I heard some comment from you in the media regarding air quality. That's been going on. That conversation's been going on since Zach Churchill was Minister of Education. So where are we at right now with your ask for at least some clarity or perhaps some reassurances that, you know, all that could be done is being done to help protect the staff, the students, and faculty inside our schools?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, is that we've been having this conversation for, since March 2020. And, to date, we haven't seen a lot of concrete, tangible improvements in ventilation and air quality. So what we have seen is our regional centers kind of ensure that what systems are there are working, and there no needed repairs. All of that has apparently been done. And apart from that, the only thing that we've really seen is in schools that have no mechanical ventilation. So that's, schools where there's no proper ventilation system. Those schools have gotten HEPA filters in their classrooms. And so for the schools that do have mechanical ventilation systems, maybe that are 20, 30 or more years old, for those schools, there's been nothing really extra that's been done apart from making sure their systems are, and I'll use the region's lingo, operating as intended. Right. So, to me, that means, a 30-year-old system is operating under 30-year-old kind of air quality or ventilation standards, and that's not up to the post-COVID world that I shouldn't say post-COVID because we're still in that, but to what we know about the virus and how it's transmitted, I believe that government's really failing to lead on the ventilation and ensuring that they're doing, like you said, everything they can to ensure our kids, parents, and school staffs that they're doing everything they can to make the air as safe as possible.
And I have to ask you, as someone who's come from the school environment, you were a teacher, you were in classroom, and obviously you heard what previous presidents have said. You've heard that dialogue through the media about whether or not these concerns were being addressed. And on one hand, you had a government saying, well, this is in their opinion, fear-mongering, that it's not as dire or as in certain need of addressing in the ways that are being required or asked. And on the other hand, the teachers union and other representatives saying, but we want to make sure everything possible is being done. How do you make that balance as the new president to go in there and open a dialogue with this government about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think being in the classroom as recently as last year gave me kind of an interesting look. So, of course, obviously, I'm hearing what our union position has been all along, but I'm also seeing it on the ground. And I think that's when I personally have trouble jiving the government message with what I'm seeing. So government message has always been consistently that, the ventilation is up to standards. Everything's, like I said, operating as intended. And then when I look in my classroom, I see dirty vents. Classroom or teachers know that their air is stifling in some of their classrooms. So they know that the air is not moving to the extent that government is telling them it is. And so that's really what I'm having a hard trouble kind of just jiving, is that those two messages from our employer, who I want to believe in my heart of hearts wants to keep us all safe, and what individual teachers are seeing on the ground. There's just they can't believe it because the evidence that they're seeing doesn't match up with government's response. And I really feel like government hasn't moved enough on this. We know much more about the virus than we did March 2020, but we haven't taken that knowledge and really put it to use in those in terms of ventilation. And we've seen other provinces lead on this. They're in Quebec. They've recently announced that there's going to be CO2 monitors for every classroom, so that teachers, kids, and parents can kind of have a real-time view of how the ventilation is working in that specific space. We've seen other jurisdictions ensure that there are HEPA filters provided for every classroom. So I feel like there's a lot more that we could be doing if there was government will to do that. And I get there's logistical challenges. I get it costs money, but to me that's dollars well spent to keep our kids and school staffs healthy and safe in buildings where they really want to be. And this goes hand in hand with the staffing shortage we're experiencing. We're nationally experiencing a teaching shortage. And if we can help make our air that much safer, that's going to keep our teachers, our school staffs, and our kids in school where ultimately they want to be.
Now, Tim Houston is the premier for all Nova Scotians, whether or not they voted Progressive Conservative in the last election. You represent all of the teachers who are members, teachers and staff who are members of NSTU. And just like in society, there are differences of opinions or perhaps different levels of concern.
No question.
And I'm sure you have some members who are saying that's not the most important thing. The air quality, yeah, sure, but there must be other issues that you have to balance in order to bring forward. So how do you decide on which issues to make, public statements about, and which issues to perhaps pry government's will or fingers off of in behind the scenes?
Yeah, certainly, that's a balancing act, right? And ultimately, I am, representing my members' interests, and so certainly, I have a good dialogue with a lot of our local leaders on the ground. I'm always available for folks to get their opinion heard, and certainly my inbox is full on people on both sides of many issues, right? So it's just a balancing act, and but I really do feel like one of the biggest issues, and I experienced it personally last year, and certainly we heard about it, was the staffing shortage. We cannot find enough substitute teachers to staff our schools appropriately. And ventilation is dovetailing with that, right? Keeping our schools safe and keeping our teachers healthy. And it's not just about ventilation, it's also about decreasing their workload, decreasing stress on them. That really is going to help us have a positive impact on getting the right number of educators in those buildings. And it's not just educators, it's lots of other educational support staff, educators, but also bus drivers. There's lots of issues. And certainly we want to make sure that our schools are safe places for kids and that we're able to provide them the services that they need. And I think sometimes the general public doesn't realize is that when we are down teachers or educators in a building, it really does impact the quality of services that our students are getting, right? Those students that need extra supports, they ultimately are not going to get those because those supports need to be pulled to, just to keep the schools running at the doors open and kind of running at minimal efficiency.
We talk about some of the labor crunch, whether it's at a sandwich shop, a coffee shop, or in the hospitals, whether it's a nurse or a doctor. We have a real labor shortage across a number of different fields, and some are suggesting this is just the culmination of a generation that is now close to retirement that may have been pushed a little bit quicker to the door because of the pandemic. Does that feel like what's happening for teaching right now?
It's certainly, I think there's an aspect of that. I think the pandemic has been challenging on society, and it's been particularly challenging, on teachers as well. Early in the pandemic, there's teachers were in schools before getting vaccinated, right? Before, we kind of forget, and that was stressful on a lot of folks, right? When we didn't know as much about the virus, when we didn't have the layers of protection that maybe we have now. So I think that's part of it. I also think too, there's been a teaching shortage pre-COVID. It's not just COVID. COVID has exacerbated that, but pre-COVID, we had some schools in this province that couldn't get enough teachers. We have other provinces that are dealing with it. So it's a national and the States is really bad in some spots. So I think what we always have to guard against is thinking it's a problem that we can't fix, right? It's a problem that is going to require both short-term and long-term solutions. Some of those solutions are going to cost money, and some aren't. But I really think if we don't put government and union and all the stakeholders put our heads together to really try to battle this recruitment and retention issue, then we're just letting it. The walls are going to crumble down on schools, metaphorically, of course. But that's not what we want.
So what plan do you present? What document do you give Minister Drew, and how do you make these fixes, short and long term. How do you vocalize that? How do you know that it may make a difference? What's your?
Sure. I mean, I think, to date we have a pretty collaborative relationship with the minister, and so I'm looking to keep that up, and I think have that dialogue. One of the things that when I got elected as NSTU president, I went through a couple month campaign where I was talking to teachers a lot, and a concern that came up was our substitute teacher pay. Right now, if our substitute teachers are working every day in this of the school year that they do not make a living wage, and that's a hard pill for folks to swallow when they have 6 years of undergraduate education in front of them, that they can't even live in this province. And so one of the short-term measures that we can take, and we've seen the province open to it, they've raised wages with the continuing care workers. They're making public statements that they're looking at raising ECE wages, which are long overdue. Substitute teachers goes hand in hand with that. We can't ask people to do difficult jobs when we have a shortage for pay that's not a living wage in this province. That's a real problem. And the other part of it is, and that's a short-term solution that maybe, because there are substitute teachers that are doing other things, right? They are making more money somewhere else. And so if we incentivize them to come back to the school system, maybe that would help. The other thing that we need to do is the other side of it. How can we, what demands can we take off teachers? What stresses can we take off teachers so they're not out of the classroom as much? And I think we can't just look at the supply side. We have to look at the demand side of the equation. And that's again a long conversation, and there's no silver bullet to that, but putting our heads in the sands isn't going to help either.
Well, and to your point, the Premier has cracked the door open to paying some professions more, recognizing that what they were earning was not commensurate with the amount of work. And it's a tough door to open because, everyone can then start to make that case. Well, why aren't I as valuable as those looking after seniors in care homes or the children before class? So
certainly, I think we really have to look at a lot of those kind of caring professions, and a lot of them are female-dominated professions that for whatever reason have been kind of put on the back burner. It's those kind of sectors of the society that we think people should just do it because they love to do it, and teachers love to teach, but at the end of the day, the love that I have for doing my job doesn't pay the bills. And you need to be able to love what you do, be successful at it, feel like you can do a really good job, and at the end of the day, make a salary that's that makes sense for what the job is.
You mentioned there's a collaborative relationship now with Minister Becky Drouin, the Minister of Education. I'm curious as to where you see things going towards contracts, conversations, long-term fixes, investments.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all those conversations when whether we're talking about contracts or investments in education are tough conversations. And while I hope that there's movement on things, I don't think anyone's on the illusion that teachers believe they're going to get everything that they need or everything that they want. That's not how negotiations work, and that's not how investments in education work, right? But what we do expect is government to really come forward. I've heard the minister, but I've also heard the Premier himself say we're willing to make investments, right? He wants to be collaborative, and we've heard a lot of talk. And so what teachers need to see is some actual investments in education, because one of the real struggles teachers are having is they're going home some days, not like they gave it their all, their kids are in front of them, they're trying to meet all the diverse needs of their students, especially in a pandemic when mental health supports, students need just those extra supports that maybe they needed before, but it's just not as pronounced. And, we need the government to come forward with these investments and solutions, and because teachers go home thinking and feeling that they could have done more, and when in fact they gave it their all, it's just they weren't supported to the degree that their kids needed them. And I think that's really, if teachers can continually see government making those investments, they're going to feel part of the process, and they're going to feel like we're just moving ahead.
He is the president of the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, Ryan Lutes. Thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all. Anytime, Sheldon. Thanks a lot.